My name's Reagan. I'm 33 years old living in Portland, Oregon, and I work as the head of strategy at an advertising firm. If someone had asked me a few months ago whether my life was going well, I would have nodded without hesitation. I had a career, friends, and had just married the man I'd loved for nearly a decade. The man I once thought was my whole world. Dean and I met back in college. He studied software engineering and I majored in communications. He was quiet, warm, and kind in a way that made me feel truly heard. Our love was steady, not flashy, but deep. Once we both got settled in our careers, Dean proposed during a lakeside picnic, the same spot where we had our very first date. It was a crisp autumn day, and even with the chill in the air, his hand holding mine felt warmer than ever. We had a small wedding in the suburbs of Seattle, nothing extravagant, just enough for the people closest to us to celebrate. I used to think that if there was ever a moment of pure bliss, it was that walk down the aisle, seeing Dean waiting at the end with a quiet, steady gaze. 2 months after the wedding, I started noticing changes in my body. Nothing too obvious, just waves of nausea in the morning, unusual fatigue, and sudden bursts of tears for no reason. At first, I thought I was just overworked. But one rainy afternoon, I pulled over outside a pharmacy, my heart trembling. I bought a pregnancy test. Not because I expected anything, but just to be sure. I still remember sitting in the bathroom, counting the seconds as the result developed. Tears filled my eyes as 2 bright red lines appeared. No warning, no build-up, just my heart trembling. What I had secretly hoped for was now real. A tiny life had begun inside me. I was going to be a mother. That evening, as Dean finished his shower and was drying his hair in the bedroom, I stood by the door, gripping the test. "Dean," I called, my voice thick with emotion. He turned to me, eyes gentle. "Is something wrong?" I held out the test, my hand shaking. "I think we're about to have a new addition to our family." Dean froze. His eyes widened for a moment, then he rushed over and wrapped his arms tightly around me. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice cracking. Dean laughed, then whispered into my ear, "Oh my God, we're going to have a baby. Reagan, I love you." My heart pounded with joy. I felt small and powerful all at once. We decided to keep the news to ourselves for a while, at least until the first trimester passed. Dean was cautious and said, "Let's wait a bit longer. I don't want people getting too excited if something happens." I agreed, even though a part of me wanted to scream in the middle of the street, "I'm going to be a mom!" But I understood. Some joys need to be guarded like sacred secrets. Still, keeping it a secret wasn't easy, especially when family dinners with Dean's relatives started becoming increasingly uncomfortable. I never imagined that the hardest part of marriage would be family dinners. Dean's family lived just about a 30-minute drive from us, and his mother often invited us over for meals. It sounded cozy in theory, but each time I went there, I felt like I was stepping into a job interview, where I was always the unqualified candidate. Margaret was the kind of woman who believed everything should be just so, according to her own standards. She used to be a high school literature teacher, now retired, but her voice still carried authority. In her eyes, I was the overly independent modern wife who didn't know how to take proper care of her husband, and most notably, couldn't cook the family's traditional stew. "Reagan, do you know how to stew chicken without drying out the meat?" she asked me the first time I tried helping in the kitchen. The words seemed harmless, but her scrutinizing eyes said otherwise. I smiled, keeping my tone light. "I guess I still have a lot to learn from you." "Oh yes, definitely," she said, not even pretending to hide her satisfaction. Dean grew up on my cooking, so don't be surprised if he makes a few comparisons now and then. I clenched my hand under the table, trying not to show it on my face. But it wasn't just Margaret. Dean's younger sister, Eliza, 28, often made me feel like an outsider too. She was an interior designer, single, stunning, and always showed up in expensive heels and perfume that smelled like a magazine ad. "Reagan, is that dress from Target?" she asked me during a small house party. Her voice wasn't loud, but just enough for everyone in the room to hear. I let out a light laugh and didn't answer. Eliza shrugged and turned to a friend. "I was just asking. It looked really comfortable." Dean stood nearby holding a glass of wine, giving me an awkward look but staying silent. That quiet hit harder than any insult. He was always kind, but when things like this happened, he said nothing. The only person in Dean's family I didn't know well was his older brother, Thomas, 35. Maybe because he never really tried. From the first time we met, Thomas gave me a stiff nod, a faint smile, and stayed quiet the entire meal. He was a surgeon, always busy, and when he did show up, it felt like he had stepped out of a different world, one I didn't belong to. I used to think I was just being overly sensitive, but then something happened one night that made everything unmistakably clear. Margaret invited us over for dinner, saying she was making Dean's favorite dish. I arrived early, trying to help her in the kitchen. But as I was peeling carrots, she walked over, frowning. "Regan, holding the knife like that will ruin the blade. Just leave it to me." I set the knife down and stepped back. I was just trying to help. She said nothing, just sighed and kept chopping at lightning speed, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. I stepped out to the living room, where Elissa sat with Thomas, scrolling through her phone. "Eliza, you look stunning today," I said, trying to stay friendly even though my mood had dipped. "Yeah, thanks," she replied without looking up. Then she turned to Thomas and murmured just loud enough for me to hear, "Wearing Target and complimenting someone's outfit." I felt my chest burn but kept smiling. Before I could excuse myself, Margaret called from the kitchen, "Regan, can you set the table?" I replied softly, "Sure," then walked toward the dish cabinet. Every step felt like another layer of endurance pressing deeper into my chest. That night when we got home, I quietly changed clothes and sat on the sofa staring out the window. Dean came out of the shower, and when he saw me sitting still, he walked over. "Is something wrong?" he asked, concerned. I turned to him and said slowly, "Dean, what if one day I just can't take it anymore?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" I didn't speak. The uncertainty was too loud. All I knew was that I was carrying a tiny life inside me, and every time I lowered my head to endure someone's criticism, it wasn't just for me anymore. It was for someone who hadn't even had the chance to cry their first breath. After forcing myself to smile through 3 hours in Margaret's kitchen, I woke up feeling nauseous, physically and emotionally. The familiar morning sickness hit me again, but this time, I didn't bother hiding it. I sat on the edge of the bed, one hand on my stomach, my heart beating slowly, heavily. Dean stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, hair still wet. When he saw me sitting motionless, he paused. "Are you okay?" I looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Dean, I don't want to keep this a secret anymore." He sat beside me and held my hand, warm and gentle as always. "I feel the same way. I know my mom will have something to say, but keeping it bottled up like this isn't helping. Whatever happens, happens." His voice was low but firm. We agreed to share the news that Saturday night, during the family dinner Margaret had scheduled the week before. She said she had a new dish from a cooking show she wanted everyone to try. I pressed my lips together when Dean repeated her words. Whatever the dish was, one thing I knew for sure. It would come with a side of challenge. Saturday evening, I wore a simple moss green dress, modest but neat. Dean told me there was no need to hide my belly, but I still wrapped a light scarf around myself, like a final layer of protection between me and the judgment waiting at the table. When we walked in, Eliza was already there, perched on a bar stool, lazily swirling a cocktail glass. "You're here," she said, not even turning her head. Thomas, as usual, scrolled through his phone. No glance up, no greeting. The room was eerily quiet. Margaret stepped out of the kitchen, wearing a beige apron printed with lavender sprigs. "Dean, come help me slice the salad. Regan, just sit and relax. Tonight I want everything done right." I held back a sigh and nodded. We had vegetarian lasagna, which Margaret said had taken her an entire afternoon to get the cheese layers just right. When dessert came, a crisp apple pie. Dean set his fork down and looked at me. That look, it was the same one he gave me the day I handed him the pregnancy test. "What is it?" Margaret asked, lifting her head, her silver spoon frozen over the pie. Dean swallowed. "Actually, we have some news to share tonight." My heart pounded. I gripped the edge of my chair, forcing myself to stay calm. "Regan's pregnant. We're having a baby." The room froze, and the silence stretched so long it felt like no one remembered how to speak. Eliza stopped swirling her drink. Thomas finally looked up. Margaret placed her spoon down, slowly. "Having a baby?" she repeated. Her tone didn't rise or fall, but behind the words was a weight I didn't dare touch. I kept my voice steady. "Yes. 8 weeks. Eliza spoke first. "Wow, that was fast. I thought you said you two wanted to get your careers fully settled first." Dean took my hand under the table, but I didn't look at him. I looked straight at Eliza, calm. We decided to adjust our plans a little. Margaret stood up, walked around the table and stopped behind me. "Regan, are you sure?" Her voice was even, but cold. I turned to face her, eyes steady. "I'm sure." "Well, not exactly the news I was expecting, but congratulations, if that's really the case." The last sentence dropped like a pebble in a still bowl of water. Dean gripped my hand tighter, but said nothing. I smiled. Not forced this time, just steady, composed, holding myself together as a quiet storm gathered. On the drive home, Dean was silent for most of the way. As we merged onto the highway, he finally asked, "Are you okay?" I figured they'd react that way. I didn't think Mom would respond like that. I tilted my head toward him, then slowly turned to the window. The wind outside was cold and thick, just like the air in that house. That place that was supposed to feel like family. 2 days later, Margaret sent us a message out of the blue, inviting us over for dinner on Wednesday night. "I want to host a proper dinner to celebrate," she wrote. Short, just one line, cold as stone, in the middle of June. Dean read it and sighed. She probably just needs time to process it. I didn't say anything. I didn't believe in the kindness behind that dinner. But I didn't want to avoid it either. Partly for Dean, and partly because I wanted to face it. No more stepping back. When we arrived, Eliza was already there, in a cream silk dress, hair in a high bun like she was ready for a red carpet. Thomas was there too, a rare sight. Margaret greeted us at the door, looked me up and down, and said something that sounded harmless. "Oh, that dress doesn't exactly do much to hide a baby bump, huh?" I clenched my hands but still smiled. "I chose it because it's comfortable." She barely acknowledged me before turning away. Dinner started with corn soup and toasted bread, Margaret proudly announced. It was a new recipe from a famous blogger. Dean leaned in and whispered, "Careful, don't criticize, she'll remember it forever." I hadn't planned to criticize anything, but Margaret was Margaret. By my third spoonful, she spoke up. "Regan, you're eating so little. Don't you want to eat for 2? The whole table fell silent. I steadied my voice. "I still get evening sickness. The doctor said it's normal in the first trimester." Eliza gave a soft chuckle and sipped her wine. "If there even is a first trimester." I turned to her, eyes sharp. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. It's all happening so fast." "I remember at the wedding you said you two weren't ready for kids yet." Margaret set her spoon down. "Eliza, that's not something to joke about." But then she looked at me and said slowly, "Regan, are you sure you're pregnant?" Dean stiffened. I could feel his hand go rigid in mine. I gave a dry smile. "I had a blood test last week." Margaret didn't let up. "Then why didn't you bring it for me to see?" I didn't think I needed to prove anything. She crossed her arms and leaned back. "My son is starting his own practice. This is a very sensitive time. It would be unfortunate if someone shared uncertain information and damaged his reputation." I waited for a defense, a word of support. But all he did was exhale sharply. "Regan, if you have the test results, maybe just show them to Mom, so everything's clear?" I turned to him, stunned. "What did you just say?" Dean fumbled. "I just thought, if it helps everyone feel reassured." I laughed. "Harsh, dry. Who exactly are you trying to reassure? Or are you doubting me too?" Margaret cut in, her voice cold as steel. "No one's doubting you, but grown-ups should be transparent." I stood up, my chair screeching loudly across the floor. "I don't owe anyone in this house an explanation. I don't need permission to become a mother." Eliza chuckled. "Here comes the drama." I looked around the table, face by face. Dean, silent. Eliza, smug. Thomas, indifferent. Margaret, detached like she was presiding over a hearing. I need some air. I turned toward the door. Before I could reach it, Margaret stood and moved quickly to block my way. If you walk out now, no one's going to believe a word you said. Move, I said. She didn't budge. You don't understand the consequences, Reagan. If what you say is true, then proving it shouldn't be a problem. I stepped closer. Don't test my limits anymore. And then it happened. I only remember Margaret suddenly reaching out, maybe to stop me, maybe to touch my arm, but the slight push at my arm threw me off balance. My foot slipped on the edge of the rug, slick underneath, and I fell. It all happened so fast, no one had time to react. I felt my back slam hard against the floor, my head spinning. Somewhere, I heard Dean scream my name. Gasping breaths, chairs clattering, and me crying without sound. A dull ache bloomed in my abdomen. Not sharp, but just strong enough to know something wasn't right. I looked up, the ceiling lights a blur, and saw Margaret's face hovering above me. Not panicked, just me, lying there, frozen by a cold running down my spine, paralyzed by fear tightening around every breath. I woke up in the blinding white of a hospital room, fluorescent lights humming overhead and the steady beep of a heart monitor beside me. My throat was raw, my head heavy like it was filled with stone. But what I felt first wasn't pain, it was fear. Bone deep, freezing fear coursing through every vein. My belly. Was my baby okay? I turned my head, panicked, scanning the room. My breathing quickened until the monitor began beeping an alarm. The door burst open and a nurse rushed in. Reagan, you're awake. You're safe now. Try to breathe slowly. I grabbed her hand, my voice hoarse. My baby, the baby. She smiled gently, reassuring me. The doctor will be here any second, but I can tell you now, the baby's heartbeat is strong. We've checked thoroughly. You both made it through the fall. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, tears spilling uncontrollably. Relief and lingering dread tangled inside me like a storm that hadn't yet passed. About 10 minutes later, Dr. Patterson, an experienced woman in her 50s with steady eyes and a compassionate presence, walked in with a chart in her hands. Reagan, I'm your attending physician. You suffered a minor concussion and bruising on your left hip, but there's no internal damage. As for the baby, the heartbeat is stable. However, we'll keep you under observation for the next 48 hours to monitor for any signs of threatened miscarriage. I was still busy swallowing the lump of humiliation rising in my throat like a wave. The door opened again. Dean walked in. His face was pale, hair disheveled like he'd sprinted the whole way. When he saw me, he froze. Reagan. I turned away, eyes fixed on the window. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want to hear a single excuse. I'm sorry, he said softly. I didn't think things would go this far. I let out a bitter laugh, my voice tight. Go far? You were right there. When your mother doubted me, when your sister insulted me, when I fell, and you still haven't said a single word to defend me. Dean stepped closer, his hands trembling. Mom said she only meant to stop you, not push. And you? I turned to face him for the first time since waking up. Do you believe that? His head dipped, and he didn't say a word. I didn't need anything else. A soft knock sounded at the door. Angela, my best friend, burst in like a storm. She had her purse, a water bottle, and fire in her eyes. God, you almost gave me a heart attack. I came as soon as the hospital called. Angela came straight to the bed and squeezed my hand. Then her gaze shifted to Dean, several degrees colder. You really let this happen? It wasn't my fault, Dean stammered. Then whose fault was it? Regan just tripped on her own, Angela snapped. Dean opened his mouth to respond but paused, then stepped back. I turned to Angela, my voice low. I remember the last few words before I blacked out. His mom said, if I walked out, no one would believe I was really pregnant. Eliza made some comment about poor planning, then his mom blocked my way. Angela exhaled sharply. We have to do something. I'm exhausted, but I'm clear-headed now. And this time, I won't stay quiet. Angela stepped outside to make a call. Just a few minutes later she returned, eyes glowing. "I'm requesting the hallway security footage from the hospital, and Dr. Patterson is willing to testify about your injuries. They can confirm this wasn't just a simple fall." I pressed my lips together. Beneath the blanket, my hand rested on my belly. A promise I couldn't take back. I wouldn't let this child grow up surrounded by lies and doubt. Dean lingered, eyes heavy with unsaid words. But none came. But this time, I didn't turn to him. "Leave, Dean. I need quiet." His figure disappearing behind the heavy door, I turned to Angela. "I know what I need to do now." The next morning, as I lay in my hospital bed waiting for the doctor's final checkup before discharge, Angela pulled the curtain closed, her eyes lit up like she'd just struck gold. "I've got something you need to hear," she whispered, just loud enough for the two of us. I sat up, still weak, but curiosity pushed me past the dizziness and pain. Angela pulled out her phone and played a recording she'd captured in the hallway while grabbing coffee. Eliza's voice came first, soft and casual. "Just say Mom didn't mean to push her. Say Reagan slipped on her own." Margaret replied, her tone flat like she was discussing a defective product. "This can't affect Dean. He just secured funding for his new office. If people hear about a family scandal, it's over." Eliza laughed. "Who'd believe Regan anyway? Mom's never liked her. Just have Dean say a few words and it'll all blow over." I gripped the blanket, fingers turning white from the pressure. The recording ended with the sound of footsteps fading. Angela looked at me and let out a breath. They're building a story, and they didn't expect someone to hear it. I won't let my child grow up in a world where truth is twisted like this. That very night, we started gathering everything we needed. Angela knew how to handle sensitive cases. She used to be a legal assistant before moving into media. "First, your medical records," she said. Dr. Patterson helped without hesitation. She signed a full statement detailing my injuries. The bruise on my left hip didn't match a simple slip and fall. She also agreed to provide testimony if summoned to court. Angela also requested hallway footage from the hospital's security system. It showed Dean rushing into the room looking panicked, and Margaret speaking with Eliza near the hallway window, unaware that a recording device was less than 15 feet away. I sent Dean one final message requesting he provide the full text history between us for the last 2 weeks, including the part where he asked me to take a blood test to clear up any doubts. He read it, but didn't reply. Angela scoffed. "Good, silence means the message stays untouched." With records, witness statements, audio evidence, and security footage in hand, we contacted attorney Susan Beck, a renowned advocate for victims of subtle domestic abuse, especially when the perpetrators are family members. I met Ms. Beck in a small conference room, softly lit and more like a therapy office than a law firm. She listened to everything without interruption, without pity, only nodding and taking notes. "What's your plan, Reagan?" she asked finally. I lifted my head without hesitation. Divorce. Full custody. And if possible, press charges against Margaret for intentional harm, no matter how she tries to justify it. Susan Beck smiled, for the first time in our meeting. "Good, you know what you want." After that meeting, everything moved fast. I officially filed for divorce 5 days after leaving the hospital. Dean called, left a few voicemails. "I don't know what to do anymore. I can't control my mother." I read the message and set my phone face down on the table, not because I didn't love Dean, but because I knew someone who can't stand up for themselves will never be able to protect their wife and child. Angela helped me move into her small apartment on the outskirts of Portland. Every day, I sat by the window, hand on my belly, talking to the child not yet born, about courage, about truth, about never letting someone else define your worth. On a quiet night, as the breeze fluttered through the curtains, I looked at Angela and whispered, "I used to think having a husband meant having a safety net. But turns out, the one person who must never abandon me is me." Angela squeezed my hand, eyes steady. "And from now on, you won't be facing anything alone." The day of the first court hearing arrived, and the sky over Oregon was gray, as if even the clouds knew something was about to be exposed. I sat in the courtroom, my hand resting gently on my belly, which had started to visibly show. Angela sat beside me, gripping my hand tightly, while attorney Susan Beck adjusted the thick stack of documents in front of her. Across the aisle, Margaret wore a pale gray blazer, lips pressed into a tight line. Eliza sat next to her, her expression indifferent, but her tightly clasped hands betrayed the tension. Dean didn't sit with them. He chose a seat in the back row, silent, like a shadow of the man who used to be my husband. The judge was an older woman with cropped silver hair, her voice clear and firm. Today we are hearing the case of Regan Miller versus Margaret Foster, on charges of intentional physical harm resulting in risk to a pregnancy, as well as a petition for divorce and child custody determination. Susan rose and walked forward, her voice calm but resolute. Your Honor, my client, Regan Miller, was 8 weeks pregnant at the time of the incident. The defendant, Margaret Foster, not only failed to offer emotional support but also directly engaged in behavior that led to a dangerous fall. She laid out the evidence meticulously. Medical records confirming that the bruising on the left hip was inconsistent with an ordinary slip. Testimony from Dr. Patterson regarding my physical condition and the potential threat to the pregnancy. Hospital security footage showing the defendant's suspicious behavior following the incident. And finally, the irrefutable audio recording. The courtroom stilled as Eliza's voice rang from the speakers, sharp, casual, and impossible to ignore. Just say Mom didn't mean to push her. She slipped on her own. Then Margaret's voice, cold and calculating. This can't affect Dean. He just secured funding for his office. I turned to look at Dean. His eyes were closed, his face pale, like he was hearing an old wound tear open all over again. When Margaret's attorney stood to counter, he argued that the fall had been an unfortunate accident, that mother-in-law and daughter-in-law dynamics are often tense, but not necessarily violent. He even tried to cast doubt by saying I had no direct witnesses at the exact moment of the fall. Susan countered swiftly, we don't deal in hypotheticals, we deal in evidence. And evidence doesn't lie. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, my heartbeat pounded in my chest. She looked directly at Margaret. Mrs. Foster, after reviewing the full documentation, testimony, and audio recording, the court finds that you did, in fact, willfully cause physical harm to a pregnant woman, thereby putting the unborn child at serious risk. Margaret remained expressionless, but Eliza lowered her head. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Regan Miller, the court grants your divorce. You are awarded full custody of the child upon birth. Dean lowered his head. I didn't turn back. Then came the final sentence of the hearing, ringing out like a bell, closing the door on months of nightmares. The court orders the defendant, Margaret Foster, to pay the plaintiff $700,000 in damages, covering emotional distress, medical expenses, and reputational harm. I took a deep breath, deeper than any I'd taken in months, and felt lighter than the autumn wind. Margaret left the courtroom in silence, never looking back. Eliza followed, her former smugness gone. Dean was the last to stand. He stepped forward, about to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. You had your chance, and you chose to stand aside. I walked away, without turning back, without regret. Angela walked beside me, a quiet smile on her face. As I pushed open the courthouse door, the late-day sun lit the sidewalk. The chill was gone. No more quiet moments that eroded trust from within. I had reclaimed what mattered most. Freedom, and the right to protect my child from any toxic hand. On a soft spring morning, I stood in the backyard, holding a small balloon pump, occasionally having to bend down as my round-bellied little girl clung to my leg, begging, "Oh, for her purple balloon first." "Mommy, the purple one, I love purple." Little Ruby giggled, her wild brown curls glowing in the morning sun. Today was her second birthday. The little house on the edge of Portland, once so quiet, now rang with children's laughter, star-shaped birthday cake, and strings of bright lights hanging from the porch to the white wooden fence. Everything was simple, warm, and unpretentious, and all of it was mine. It had been 4 years since the day I walked out of that courtroom with justice in my hands and a still healing heart. I never imagined time could heal that deeply. Margaret had been sentenced to 2 years for intentional assault and endangering a pregnant woman. She had vanished from every frame of my life since. No letters, no apology. But I didn't need one. Her absence was the purest healing I could have asked for. Dean had stepped down from his law office after part of the courtroom recording leaked. I heard he moved to Colorado to start over. We kept no contact. Our only connection was through attorneys and a divorce ruling that couldn't be undone. After Ruby was born healthy in the arms of both me and Angela, I knew I couldn't go back to my old office job, where a woman's voice was so easily drowned out by pressure and bias. I needed autonomy. So I founded Beacon Voices, a marketing firm that helps people who've endured trauma tell their stories, through visuals, through content, and through the voices they once believed no one wanted to hear. My first client was a single mother who had to sleep in her car after being fired for speaking out against her manager. After my media campaign, she received funding from 3 nonprofit organizations and is now opening a vocational training center for young women. I didn't just find myself again through that work. I helped others avoid being buried in silence the way I nearly was. Angela's now the CEO of Beacon Voices. She moved to live near me and Ruby and became a real auntie in every sense. I honestly don't know how I would have managed those early days of motherhood without her. Sleep-deprived, learning how to raise a child while running a business at the same time. "Where's the birthday girl?" Angela stepped into the yard, holding 2 big gift boxes. Ruby screamed like a superhero had just arrived and bolted toward her. From a few steps away, I watched my daughter wrap her arms around Angela, the woman who had held both of us together, my heart swelling with something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, peace, the strength that had returned after days I thought I wouldn't survive. Guests arrived one by one, women I met through projects, mothers who had once been misunderstood, hurt, pushed through darkness. Now we sat together, swapping stories, laughing loud, and proving that the past does not define anyone's worth. That evening, after cleaning up crumbs of birthday cake, piles of wrapping paper, and sagging balloons, I carried a drowsy Ruby to her room, tucked her in, and sat on the edge of the bed. She opened her eyes and whispered, "Mommy, are we going to have another birthday tomorrow?" I laughed and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart, but tomorrow we can still eat cake and cuddle." She gave a soft nod, eyes fluttering shut. I stayed a while, letting the quiet settle around us. I had walked through a failed marriage, through doubts cast over my pregnancy, through being pushed literally and emotionally to the edge. But I didn't stay down. I got up, for my daughter, for myself, and for the women still learning to step out from someone else's shadow. My story isn't just about surviving trauma. It's proof that truth, when protected and pursued, will always find light. I was doubted, I was knocked down, physically and emotionally, but I learned to stand on my own. Now, as a mother, a business owner, and a woman surrounded by those who see real worth, I understand this. Strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from getting up, especially when no one believes you can. What do you think about Regan's choices? Was she too harsh, or was it exactly what she needed to protect her child? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and resilience.